My name is Ridi Tlhabi, and I'll be your MC for this morning. Today, we are launching the Ibrahim Index. I knew this would happen. Yes, indeed. The Ibrahim Index of African Governance. That's what today is all about. And this index is a tool by which we monitor good governance in Africa. And why does good governance matter? Well, good governance does matter because it tells us whether our continent is making progress in realizing the rights of all its citizens. It tells us whether we are embracing human rights or not, providing social justice for vulnerable citizens. It tells us whether the rule of law applies in our countries. And while we are focusing on South Africa, the conversation is really about the African continent. I'm very encouraged as I look in the room and I see young people. No disrespect to people my age and over, but it is often very, very invigorating, encouraging to see young people take a keen interest in matters of governance, because you are, I don't want to say the future leaders, you are already leaders. And if our continent is going to be globally competitive and be known for good governance and be known for a place where well-being, where health rights, reproductive rights, media freedom, the rule of law, independent judiciary, where all of those can be achieved, it will be because of your actions as young people. So thank you so very much, and I think it is a positive that the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, together with the African Peer Review Mechanism, has managed to attract the interest of young people. That deserves a round of applause, I think. So this morning, the program is truly participatory and inclusive. We're going to have some poll questions from you because your views matter. With the help of technology, you will be able to communicate your position on some of the questions that are addressed in the IIAG, in the IIAG report. We are going to hear from some experts, both from the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, from the South African government, from the African Union, from the African Peer Review Mechanism as well, and from the media. So I hope that we can really deepen the dialogue and deepen the conversation. If you are on Twitter and you're watching this and live streaming and you want to participate, our hashtag is IIAG, Ibrahim Index of African Governance. And there's another hashtag that I want you to keep in mind, and that one is hashtag AskMIF, as in Mo Ibrahim Foundation. Hashtag AskMIF. We can make it trend, and we can attract people from all corners of the African continent to be a part of this conversation today. And so without much ado, let me invite Professor Eddie Maluka, who's the CEO of the African Peer Review Mechanism. He'll come and give us our opening remarks, after which we will be addressed by Minister of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, Dr. Zweli Mkhize. And I always like to refer to his life as a doctor, because part of what we are talking about today is to make sure that healthcare and rights are available to citizens of the African continent. Professor Maluka.
No, thank you very much, my sister Reddy, and thanks. I'm very happy that you could agree to. I know you are very busy. You should be on air now. To be on the ground, it's not usual for you, but we are happy that you are here. You are sitting in front of us. You are not behind the radio. And Minister, we are also happy that you are here, and we welcome you. And after I speak, I think my colleague and elder brother, Dr. Abdullah Jane, will also take the floor, and we've got also our colleague on the podium from the Mo Ibrahim, Madam Natalie, and also to recognize the excellencies who are here. I've seen some of the excellencies from APRM countries, Ambassador of Sudan, the Ambassador of High Commissioner of Namibia. I've seen my brother also from Uganda. So those I don't see because I'm wearing, I'm not wearing my double focus glasses. So I'm not seeing everything that is in front of me. I've seen some of the luminaries of the Mo Ibrahim, the board members are sitting in here. Mr. Jay Nadu, who's well known to all of us, Professor Abdullah Batili, Dr. Hamdok and other colleagues who are here from the Mo Ibrahim. Everybody is welcome. Mine is just to welcome all of you here and to assure you that we'll do our best to make sure that today's deliberations and interactions are a success. And to say that we have been working with the APRM, we have been working with the Mo Ibrahim since 2017. We have a memorandum of understanding, and they did an excellent report. And then they said to us, let's work together and do this launch. We said, why not? So we are doing this launch with them, and my colleague and the colleagues from the Mo Ibrahim have been working together to put together this. And just to say what the APRM does, you know, the APRM, we have 36 countries. Namibia is our youngest member. We are working with the authorities in Namibia at the moment to set up the national structures. Uganda, we just did the second review of Uganda, which was received by the president of Uganda in last January. And Sudan, of course, we did also the review of Sudan, which was the first review of Sudan. And then now, as I'm speaking now to you, that we are deploying a team to Mozambique to do the review of Mozambique. We're sending a team to Senegal to do the targeted review of Senegal on natural resources governance. Djibouti, they are doing a review on decentralization. And so this is what we do. We send teams, we review countries, we write reports. The minister was talking to us earlier about performance, governance, performance review. And we're saying in Africa, African countries are not afraid of it. So you allow our teams, we go everywhere, and next year after the election, we'll be doing the review of South Africa. My colleagues from the DPSA here will be here, and we'll be working with the South African authorities to do the South African review, and the President Ramaphosa will receive his report, inshallah, in 2020. And then it will be presented to him by the critical team of our panelists, and then he will respond. There will be a discussion. There will be positive issues out of the report because there's a lot of good things we are doing here. But there will also be some challenges that will be pointed out in our report. So all I have to say for now is that today you will be receiving commentaries by experts, by members of the Mo Ibrahim and a number of our colleagues on the Mo Ibrahim report, and some of my colleagues will also talk about the APRM processes, how they work, and all of that. So all I have to do for me now is basically to welcome you and to thank you for being here and to say Friday is a difficult day. Some of you have to go to the mosque. Some of you have to prepare yourself for other things. And those who don't like going to work on Friday are probably at home. So we are happy that you are all here, and we thank you for being here. And I'm going to invite my brother, Dr. Abdullah Jane, to make his remarks before we invite our sister back to the stage to introduce the minister. Please. Very welcome.
Mr. Minister, Excellencies, friends, particularly my friend Eddie and my colleague Natalie Dolapam, my co-executive director in the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, ladies and gentlemen. Let me also join Professor Maloka to welcome you all to this joint APRM Mo Ibrahim Foundation event to launch our 2018 report. And I thank all of you for coming, and I understand from what my brother said that Friday is a bad day, so therefore it's against the background. I particularly am grateful that you could come. Having said that, maybe you'll also allow me to, just like the CEO did, to recognize a few of our personalities here, starting with the minister. I told him before we came here how happy we are that he could come, and how happy we are that we are launching this here at a very critical moment in South Africa. We know that the minister, certainly under the leadership of President Ramaphosa, is for governance and transparency. So it's timely that we have this debate in South Africa. I also want to recognize our board member, Jay Naidu, whom you all know, articulate, intellectual, controversial, and we see what he says. I have my colleague, Dr. Hamdok. I want to use the opportunity to tell you that Dr. Hamdok and I worked for many years in the Economic Commission of Africa when I was Executive Secretary. He retired yesterday. I could not go to his ceremony. So if you allow me, I will use this opportunity to publicly thank him for being a fantastic collaborator, partner, supporter, and advisor, and to wish him the best in his retirement. We also have Professor Bachili, who's here, a known Pan-Africanist, who's now the former senior minister in the government of Senegal, but who is now the special representative of the Secretary General for Madagascar. We should also wish him luck in bringing order to Madagascar, and the elections there would take place. We have many personalities here. Maybe I should not bore you by going to that. I know South Africa is a very informal society, and therefore some of them might not even to mention them, but we thank each and every one of you for being here. Why are we here? What is the purpose of? That is the purpose of this gathering. We are here really to be able to discuss and debate the 2018 report with special emphasis on the South African region and South Africa as a country. And this you will hear from my colleague, Natalie Dolapam, eventually. This report is one of the most, if not the most credible set of data you could have on the situation of governance in the continent. And governance is, we define as those goods and services that governments are supposed to deliver to their citizens, and the goods and services that the citizens really request from their government. And so we have this comprehensive data set, which you would see the details of later on, but which has 4 main pillars of safety and rule of law, participation in human rights, socio-economic opportunities, and human development. So we measure governance in every African country, 54 African countries. We don't leave anyone behind, and we have data provided from many sources, a lot of them African sources, credible data, which inform the indicators, and we do it in such a way that no one data source dominates. So it's a very credible set of data, which we can always improve on, but for the time being, I think we provided the best available. And we are happy to be here in Joburg. I think it's a city of debate, of dialogue, of protest, of active civil society. So we are happy we are here. We are here happy also. I think we're at the right time because we are in the midst of transformation. And we salute you, Mr. Minister, for the way and manner that you manage your transition here under the able leadership of President Ramaphosa. So we continue that debate. We continue to support you in what you are doing in the area of governance, and I'm sure here we'll have very, very meaningful and rigorous debate. I cannot stop this short intervention without thanking my friend and brother, the CEO of APRM, Eddie Maluka, who again publicly I would salute for the way and manner he has transformed APRM. APRM is something I've been involved in from the very inception, but it's now, I always see it as the most credible litmus test of Africa's commitment to governance. And therefore, it has to be a robust and credible instrument. And I think that's what Eddie Maluka has been able to do. We partner with him, as he said, because for us, we see APRM and the Mo Ibrahim Foundation as 2 sides of the same coin. And therefore, it's only natural that we partner with them. We are a strategic partner. We signed a memorandum of understanding, and we will continue to do events of this nature. I participate in their review meetings and so on. But I know that Eddie also has a very dynamic team under him, and they partnered very well with our foundation, and the foundation has come here in full force from London, led by Natalie Dollar-Palm, and we also have Yannick, we have Rebecca, we have all the others who are here really to make sure that we prepare the grounds for a meaningful, rigorous, robust dialogue on what's happening in the world of governance in the African world, in Southern Africa in particular, in South Africa also in particular. So with this, I wish you fruitful deliberations, and I thank you for listening to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Janet. I beg your indulgence for just a minute. As I said, we do have a very youthful audience, and I do this deliberately because I think that part of restoring faith and confidence and achieving good governance in our continent is to know the skills, the human resource, the capacity that we have. And so that when conversations happen about our continent and we reach moments of despair, we know the resources that we have and we can challenge ourselves even further. So I do beg your indulgence. I do want to share with the young audience your history and your profile as well so that they know who's here. Mr. Janet is a former UN Under-Secretary General and Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Africa. He's a diplomat and he is an economist. Wasn't it Bill Clinton's election manifesto and slogan saying it's the economy, and used a rude word, which I won't repeat here, but the economy is everything. So if you want to have conversations with him and learn from his very rich well of knowledge, he is here as well. And Professor Maluka is also quite modest because he always introduces himself using his work at the African Peer Review Mechanism. But I want to tell the young people that you are a prolific author. And it's important. We had Fees Must Fall, and the young students were talking about intersectionality, things that we found out as we were reaching the twilight of our working career. But young people were talking about it. And for all of you who have debates at university or wherever you are, he has written several books, including one that is particularly important now, Friends of the Native, the Inconvenient Past of South African Liberalism. He has written about the South African Communist Party. He has written a book problematizing the African Renaissance. So if that is information that you can use as a young person, I invite you to do that as well. We welcome our former public protector, Professor Thuli Madonsela, and I do know that she was speaking at a function last night, and it also was about governance. It was about building our democracies, and it was about women's empowerment. So she's come straight from a very long program last night and flew into Johannesburg, coming to Pretoria this morning. So we welcome you as well. Oh, that's great. We've already been introduced to the minister, and I would like once again to spend a moment to say that since his appointment this year in 2018, Minister of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, he was appointed in February 2018, but not new to government and governance. He was in KwaZulu-Natal as an MEC, as a premier. Dr. Mkhize has worked with various stakeholders in finding underlying causes of the challenges facing and affecting our municipalities, a very topical issue here in South Africa, one that is relevant as we launch this report today. Prior to this, he held several roles. He served in South Africa in various capacities, including as a medical doctor at the Edendale Hospital in Pietermaritzburg and at Temba Hospital in Kabokweni, Mpumalanga. Minister, welcome.
Thank you very much, Program Director, Ms. Reddy. The head of the APRM, CEO, Professor Maluka, Mo Ibrahim Foundation Board members, in particular, Excellency Abdoulaye Jane, and other members of the board, the Excellencies, ambassadors who are here, colleagues, I see my former minister in the Nelson Mandela government, Jay Naidu, former public protector, Smatonsela, and all esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen, the leadership of the DBSA, the DDG, and other senior officials. Good morning to you all. Thank you very much for inviting us to be part of this very interesting debate this morning. I'm very privileged to address the launch of the 2018 Ibrahim Index of African Governance and to welcome you all on behalf of the Minister of Public Service and Administration. Good governance is an essential prerequisite to the attainment of a better life for our citizens and to achieve sustainable peace, regional integration, and socio-economic transformation for Africa. Your presence here as eminent guests confirms the support of the promotion of good governance in our country and also in our continent. I'm delighted to see that the African Peer Review Mechanism is collaborating with the Mo Ibrahim Foundation. The APRM is our innovative, homegrown governance program as the African continent. The launch of the APRM in March 2003 under the auspices of NEPAD, heads of state and government, was one of the key achievements of the AU and the continent. It confirmed the seriousness of Africa with regards to improving governance in our continent. The partnership with the Mo Ibrahim Foundation provides an opportunity to showcase examples of good governance in the continent and also to provide lessons to be used to improve our governance systems for the good of the people. As a South African government, we are pleased to be associated with this occasion, given our commitment to good governance and the building of a united, democratic, and prosperous South Africa, built on the foundations of human rights and the quest for better life for all, especially the poor. We have since 1994 worked on building that type of society, working with partners in our continent and around the world. President Cyril Ramaphosa has this year announced that our country has entered a new dawn. We are on a mission to renew the values that our liberation struggles icons such as Nelson Mandela, Albertina Sisulu, Walter Sisulu, and others whose Albertina Sisulu and Nelson Mandela were celebrating their centenaries this year. And they, together with most of those that worked with them, held these values quite dearly. And those are the values of honesty, integrity, loyalty, and selfless service to our people. The promotion of good governance remains central to the achievement of those goals. It means promoting the type of leadership within government and society excuse me, that our people can trust and believe in. It means promoting a public service excuse me, where people will do good even if nobody's watching, and who will also not hesitate to report any wrongdoing in order to promote clean governance. The fight against crime and corruption thus remains pivotal as we strengthen our democratic institutions and promote clean governance, promoting hard work, efficiency, and effectiveness. At the end of the day, it's not about being a full-time public servant, but more about people who have dedicated their lives to serving people. That is what public service should be about. In this era of seeking to control our public service and its vast resources, we must have public service cadre that is impenetrable. We appeal to our public servants to focus on their work and not to be distracted by business interests or by greed, which threatens the public service and enables corruptions to creep in and seriously threaten good governance. Excuse me. We need a stable, efficient, corrupt-free, caring, and effective public service because the lives of our people depend on such service being made available to them by their government. And we have a phrase which we call here, Batupili, which means it's our people first. As proud members of the African Union, we remain committed to working with sister nations to attain vital goals such as encapsulated in the Agenda 2063, such as upholding peace, security, conflict prevention, gender equality, youth empowerment, and uplifting vulnerable groups, and as an enabler for sustainable democracy and including economic growth and development. We remain committed to playing our part in building a prosperous African continent where there is an end to disease and homelessness, and the promotion of more democratic governments that put interests of the people first. Some positive developments and opportunities have come to the fore in the continent which will enhance the quest for good governance. There are opportunities for better governance through the improved ICT networks and social media. Autocratic governments no longer have the monopoly of communicating with the outside world. Citizens can share with the world anything happening in their country and can also expose wrongdoing through social media. As access to ICT is also a positive development for the economic activity, especially for small businesses and youth entrepreneurship. Positive developments also include regional integration as building block to the African integration through the Continental Free Trade Area and the Common African Passport. African countries will soon be able to increase trade amongst each other and boost economic development within the continent. Such improved people-to-people cooperation will also encourage learning from one another with regards to the system of governance. With regards to human development, Africa's most important dividend is the youthfulness of its population. We need to invest in our youth by inculcating the democratic values and principles. They should be the custodians of these values that many African liberation heroes and heroines sacrificed immensely for. What is important is that every action we take each day must help us to end poverty, inequality, and unemployment, and enable our people to live better lives. That applies in our country and indeed across the continent, so that we can build the type of Africa that Nelson Mandela, Julius Nyerere, Agostinho Neto, Kenneth Kaunda, and all other illustrious leaders of our continent sacrificed for. We therefore want to congratulate all those who have been involved in putting together this 2018 Ibrahim Index that is being launched today. It is an important contribution to building the Africa we strive for. So I hope that all of us will have a look at the document, because it's really quite an enlightening and very informative document. And I think it's a very important one to have a document where we have a mechanism where governments, academics, researchers, civil society can play a role in promoting accountability and transparency of various governments in our countries. And we were discussing now with the APRM that we need to also emphasize that amongst our own government at different levels, not just at national government level, but also at levels of provinces and levels of municipalities. It's the old African way of learning from one another, where we share best practices, where we are able to correct each other, and we are able to support each other in cases where some of us are faltering or going through challenges, but we can learn from each other through good success stories, but also learn from the mistakes of others by sharing right across the different spheres of governance. And I believe, therefore, that as we prepare for the report from South Africa, we must have actually deepened this whole issue of peer review amongst the various levels of government, and in particular with the municipalities, where we're going through quite a lot of challenges with the issues of governance. And I believe that this is one tool wherein we can learn from each other, support each other, correct each other, but at the end of the day, strengthen governance, but also ensure that the stakeholder involvement is improved, whereby communities, civil society is able to play a role in guiding governments in terms of how some of the issues have to be managed. Ultimately, we've seen our communities responding in violent protests whenever they show disapproval, but I think that these kinds of mechanisms will be able to assist us to open up channels where the concerns, the anger, the difficulties that the communities are experiencing can actually go through a formalized mechanism where we know we can always, impact on the way government at local level, at provincial and national level operates. I hope that this document will actually assist all our structures of governance in the country, as it will in the rest of the continent. And I want to say thank you very much for the partnership, and we want to continue to promote that partnership and say it's one good step forward. And in the future, our continent must be known for good, transparent, accountable governance, wherein our lives, the lives of our people continue to improve, and that investment continue to flow in the continent on the basis that governance is trusted and governance is good. And all of this for us is the only way to strengthen democracy. We wish you everything of the best, and we really look forward to the discussions of this meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mkhize. Thank you very much for outlining the dreams and the aspirations. And it is our dream that for this generation of Africans and coming generations, those aspirations will be realized. So, the main reason we are here today is to learn more and engage with the findings of the 2018 Ibrahim Index of African Governance, and to help us go through that journey, because it is important. We've got those polling questions that I talked about earlier. I've got a polling slide that will come up. You'll be invited to participate and to vote. I'll tell you more about that in just a moment. But let us invite Madame Nathalie Delpam, who's the Executive Director of the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, to come and talk to us about the findings. Just some important information about her. She was previously a French senior civil servant. Her most recent position was Inspector General of Finances at the Ministry of Economy and Finance between 2007 and 2010. And she will tell us more about the 2018 IIAG key findings.
No, it's fine. I mean, it's... Thank you very much. So I'm going to present you the general findings of this 2018 index. So, okay. So let me first begin by giving you a very quick overview about what this index is about. We have just launched the 12th annual iteration of this index. And once again, let me remind you that it's a tool, it's a dashboard that's meant for everybody who is interested in public governance, be it government, civil society, academicians. It's freely available. And it's a dashboard which is assessing the state of governance in every 54 different countries of the continent, coming from data that have been produced by 35 different institutions. So we are currently gathering almost 200 variables that are combined to make 102 indicators. These 102 indicators are classified under 14 subcategories, 14 components, which are categorized into 4 main dimensions: participation and human rights, safety and rule of law, sustainable economic opportunity, and human development. So we now have about 150,000 data, which is quite a wealth of data, which allow us to look at the state and trend of public governance in each of these 54 countries. Let me remind you that we define this public governance as the ability of governments to deliver a common basket of public goods and services to their citizens. And this basket of public goods and services is the basket that every citizen in the 21st century is entitled to get from its government. We also focus on what citizens get, not only political commitments, because this is very important in public governance. Now, every year we refine our index because we are relying on available data, and we are very much working to get more available data. This year, for example, we've added 16 new indicators to our index, which are either strengthening the indicators we already have or adding this year two very important dimensions. The first being the promotion of socioeconomic integration of youth, and the second one is enabling environment for infrastructure development. Now that we have this very huge wealth of data, we are also able to be a little bit more specific on trend analysis. Since last year, we have developed a new analysis whereby we look at what has been happening over the last 10 years, but also within these last 10 years, looking at the more recent trends to see whether progress is declining, quickening, deterioration is worsening, or indeed slowing down. For example, you can have countries which are registering progress over the last decade, but over the last 5 years, either this progress is quickening, picking up pace, and this is of course very positive, or, and this is less positive, progress is slowing, or even these countries are reverting to deterioration. On the other side, you can have countries which trends are over the decade showing deterioration. For some of them, deterioration is quickening, worsening, but for others, within the last 5 years, deterioration is either slowing down or even turning to progress. And these trends are applicable both to countries or to dimensions or components of the index. And this is a very useful analysis, once again, that everybody can use, big governments, civil society, academicians, experts. So what does this, here you have the structure of the index, and you can see the overall governance score, and then the 4 categories, the subcategories, and the indicators below. So what does this last index tell us about the state of governance, of public governance across the continent? On average, as you can see on the graph, governance remains on an upward, albeit slow, trajectory. Progress is slow, but the African average score in 2017 is the highest seen in the last 10 years. So this is good news. What is good news, too, is that 34 countries have improved over this 10-year period, which means that 70% of Africa's citizens live today in a country in Africa where governance is better than it was 10 years ago. As you can see in the graph, there is a slight stalling between 2010 and 2014, and since 2014, progress has picked up again. Now, how did that happen? Basically, this picking up is driven by 15 countries which are registering progress over the decade, and on top of that, have picked up pace over the last 5 years. You can see the example of Morocco, which is really quickening its pace of progress over the decade. In fact, Morocco, the 3 most striking countries here are Morocco, Côte d'Ivoire, and Kenya in this region, who show the most impressive results in that they are the only country that both managed to have been the most improved over the last 5 years and at the same time have quickened their pace over the last 5 years. But meanwhile, and this is important to see, on these 34 countries that do register a positive trend over the decade. The majority of them are either slowing progress over the last 5 years. You can see the example of Niger, or even registered a decline over the last 5 years, and you can see the example of Ethiopia. So this is a bit of a concern. Now, we also have, and this is also a concern, countries that are deteriorating over the decade, and among these declining countries over the decade, for a majority of them, decline is worsening. So this is another matter of concern. 2/3 of these deteriorating countries are getting even worse over the last 5 years. So all in all, you can see that countries in Africa are taking diverging paths. So even if the range of scores between the highest and the lowest ranking countries, between Mauritius and Somalia, has shortened, the countries are now dispersing around African average. You can see that in the graph. You have the blue. Is it blue in the, well, it's not blue, but the black is average. And you have the dispersion of countries on every side of the black dot, which is the continental average. Now, what's important also to know about this index, it's important to look at a more granular level, not only at country level, but at dimension, subcategories, and indicator level. Now, what do we see, and what does it tell about the path of public governance? We have mixed trends between categories. As you can see on that graph, 3 dimensions are doing well, more or less, according to each other. Human development, which is the best, participation and human rights, and sustainable economic opportunity, which is almost flat. We'll come to that again before. Meanwhile, safety and rule of law is deteriorating. But even within each dimension, you have diverging paths. I will come back to that later, but basically, if you take human development, progress is driven by health, but education is deteriorating. If you take participation and human rights, you have a huge progress in gender, but rights is showing warning signs. If you take sustainable economic opportunity, when there is progress, it's mainly led by infrastructure, but business environment is really deteriorating. If you take safety and rule of law, the deterioration which is still there is driven by still decline in national security and personal safety, but you really have progress that's appearing in rule of law, and that's very good news. Now, we do see indeed increasing, when I say we, it's not the foundation, it's the data that show us this. We do see increasing warning signs. Why? Because if you look at what's happening over the decade, you have 3 subcategories out of the 14 of the index that show quite large African average declines. So it's national security, business environment, and personal safety. But over the last 5 years, you have 4 new subcategories that are also showing declines, and these are important ones. Rights, public management, education, and rural sector. And all these dimensions are key to public governance and key to the African continent, given the vast majority of young people that are now living in this continent. So, if we now take dimensions one by one, sustainable economic opportunity, which is, of course, probably our main concern. Sustainable opportunity, you can see the graph here, its progress is stalling. I mean, improvement at African average is solely driven by infrastructure. And even there, we do have some warning signs in electricity supply and transport infrastructure, which are not keeping pace with the growing demography on the continent. Barely any progress has been made in public management. I'm talking at African average, which measure issues like effectiveness of the public service, economic diversification, and fiscal policy. And this subcategory is beginning to decline on average over the last 5 years. Rural sector scores are also falling, and this is another matter of concern given the importance of this dimension for the African continent. But more concerning even is the declining business environment dimension that has really held back progress in this sustainable economic opportunity. There are, of course, success stories at country level, for example, Egypt and Rwanda. But on average, this dimension is not doing well. Now, this is a matter of concern, and this is why we think it's somehow a decade of lost opportunity, because if you compare the progress in the sustainable economic opportunity and what has happened at economic level, it appears rather like a waste. It's very disappointing. Basically, Africa at continental level, Africa's GDP has grown by almost 40%. Meanwhile, progress in sustainable economic opportunity dimension, only 0.2%, so almost nothing. And I mean, it is lost opportunity. It is lost opportunity because we are talking about a continent, once again, where demography is soaring and young people are becoming an overwhelming majority. There is no link in trend between economic growth and progress in sustainable economic opportunity, and there is almost no link either between the size of the economy of a country and its score in sustainable economic opportunity. Among the 5 biggest economies of the continent, Algeria, Sudan, Nigeria, and Angola, they are ranking in the second half of the continent for sustainable economic opportunity. Meanwhile, you have the 5 and 6 smallest economies of the continent, Cape Verde and Seychelles, who are ranking 5 and 6 best in sustainable economic opportunity. So there is really a mismatch between the size of the economy and the potential of an economy and the ability to deliver sustainable economic opportunity for the people on the ground. You can see the absence of correlation here on this graph. Now, as I said, the most concerning trend and the pulling down of the sustainable economic opportunity results is driven down by the bad results in business environment. There too, these bad results, which you can see in the yellow line on the graph, are running counter to the growth of the working age population. On the left side, the green one is what has happened over the last 10 years, and the gray part is what's going to happen in the next 10 years. So you can see the complete mismatch here too between the business environment for the young people who are going to come into the labor market in the next years. Once again, remember that 60% of the continent's population is under 25. So this is really figures that need to be taken into account. 39 countries show decline in business environment. And the indicator, which is measuring satisfaction with employment creation, which is a key indicator, has also declined, indicating that many citizens are currently unhappy with current job-creating performance of African governments. Now, let's go now to human development. Human development is both the best scoring and the best trending dimension of the index. You can see that on the graph. It's really a very good result. And this very positive result is driven mainly by health. You can see on the graph, I hope you can read. Here we have some extremely positive indicators, really following a very positive trends. The first being antiretroviral treatment provision, which has improved in every 54 countries of the continent. Then you have absence of child mortality, absence of communicable diseases, and absence of maternal mortality. These 4 indicators are really, really impressively progressing over the last 10 years. Now, we do have some warning signs, even in health. 2, I would point out to 2. The first one is what we call the absence of undernourishment. Absence of undernourishment has deteriorated over the last 5 years. Now, what explanations here? Probably the most important one is the effect of climate change, which is really getting a heavy toll on the food security and nutritional requirements. The second one is about expectations. Because there has been progress in human development, progress in health, expectations have risen, and progress that's now still being made is running behind the expectations of the growing population. So this is something that we must certainly pay attention to and deal with. What's more concerning in human development is what's happening in education. Here too we see the mismatch between the growing population and the ability of governments to deliver this absolutely key public good, which is education. Education is still progressing over the last decade, but over the last 5, it has begun to deteriorate and to decline, and this is really concerning. Once again, given the growing population of children that's existing on the continent. Here too, I mean, it's not to say that governments haven't been delivering. I mean, if you look at indicators such as tertiary or secondary education enrollment, they are progressing and they have made huge progress over the last 10 years. Such is the case also with human resources in primary schools and primary school completion. There are 2 big progress. But what is not satisfying is is seen in the indicators that measure whether education is meeting the needs of the economy and whether education is meeting citizens' expectation. And it also points out to another concerning thing, which is the growing mismatch between the level of education and the employability of young people. We are living now on a continent where the young generation is more educated than their parents, but less employed. And this can't continue, obviously. Participation and human rights, very quickly. We have seen progress, undoubtedly, in participation and human rights dimension over the last decade, mainly led by huge progress in gender and, of course, in democratic participation, with more and more free and fair elections happening over the continent. But we probably can't resume democracy to participation in executive elections every 5 or 10 years. And what is a matter of concern is this is probably maimed, maybe even threatened, by shrinking civil society space, which is appearing in all indicators that relate to civic space and participation. Freedom of association and assembly, freedom of expression, civil rights and liberty, civil society participation, political participation, all these indicators key are slowing down over the last 5 years. Safety and...
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I've been asked to call for a tea break because the minister has to leave. So I wonder if we can finish this last slide and then pick up.
Yeah. So very quickly on safety and rule of law. Safety and rule of law continues to decline on average, driven down by very bad results in personal safety and national security. But what's absolutely important is to see that we have progress in rule of law and transparency and accountability. which are two key dimensions because they are strongly correlated to the score in overall governance and in sustainable economic opportunity. So you can see the two trends here, and you can see, but I'll come back to this later because I understand that the minister has to leave, and we can maybe end after Your Excellency has left.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Minister. The Minister has some other urgent governance events that have to be attended at this moment. And we will be picking up after the tea break. I've been asked to...
Can I maybe just finish the presentation?
That's what I thought would work. So we'll do, as Professor Maluka, we'll postpone the tea break and then you can continue.
I just have 2 minutes, so I won't be very long. Sorry, so can I have the slide? Okay, so I think the slideshow has gone, and I'm so. Huh? Thank you. You prefer to finish? I really have. I'm finished in 3 minutes. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So, because this is important, actually, it's indeed this very strong correlation that you can see appearing here on the graph between the two dimensions that are rule of law and transparency and accountability with overall governance scores. It's the strongest correlation that we see in the index. And we also have the strongest correlation between transparency and accountability and sustainable economic opportunity. So here you have the best practices that are probably needed for any country that wants to upgrade their performance in sustainable economic opportunity and in overall governance. And also this last one shows that when you look at the best performing indicators, both best performing and best trending, you can see that they are spread over the full index, meaning that in order to be sustained and in order to be positive, progress in governance must spread over all 4 dimensions of the index. The balanced approach to governance progress is absolutely key. So this is the last slide, which is a summary of the key findings of this 2018 index. Thank you very much. Maybe we can keep the slide here.
Right now, we get into our discussion and debate. The topic, the underlying factors that account for the main findings of the 2018 report and how these findings and trends have evolved over the past 10 years. This session will be chaired by Mr. Abdoulaye Jane, Executive Director of the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, and he is sitting with his panelists, whom I will introduce very briefly, and they will have about 15 to 20 minutes to have a discussion, and you can also participate. There'll be a Q&A. I'll go around with a microphone, and you can also be a part of this debate. His Excellency Kintu Nyango, Ambassador of Uganda in South Africa, welcome. We have Dr. Abdallah Hamdok, Deputy Executive Secretary, Economic Commission for Africa, Chair of the IIAG Advisory Council for the Mo Ibrahim Foundation. Welcome to you. We have Professor Thuli Madonsela, Social Justice Chair at the University of Stellenbosch and former Public Protector of South Africa. A warm welcome to you. I knew that would happen. We also have Ms. Malango Mugogo, Managing Director, Zeni Zeni Sustainable Finance, and she's a former Mo Ibrahim Leadership Fellow. Welcome to you. Over to you.
Madam Moderator, thank you very much. Thank you for introducing us and telling us what our panel is all about. I am particularly happy that we are meeting now just after that presentation, which again shows the robust and meaningful data that we produce, that we collect from the Mo Ibrahim Foundation enabling us to really spell out, discern the trends that various aspects of governance are taking place in Africa. Of course, we realize Africa is 54 countries, and therefore, if you do things at the aggregate level, you should have some concerns. But I have with me this eminent panel. Madam, you've introduced them up, so I would not go into that. And I would just say that what we want to do is to get comments from each of them, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, saying, you've listened to this. What are some of those trends that are of concern to you or that you salute? And what do you think are some of the underlying, from your experience, the underlying causes for the direction of where this continent is heading? We'll do that, and then, of course, as you said, we will then open up questions. So let me start with my ambassador. High Commissioner, maybe, is the right title. Coming from a great country, Uganda, and representing Uganda is an equally great country, South Africa. Mr. High Commissioner.
I thank you very much, sir. My title, my rank is ambassador, but my title is Deputy High Commissioner.
Oh, Deputy High Commissioner.
Deputy High Commissioner.
Okay.
From the Uganda High Commission.
Okay.
I would like to start by thanking the organizers, the APRIM and the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, Professor Eddie Maloka, for according me the opportunity to engage in this August forum. And indeed, to thank the Mo Ibrahim Foundation for having, in collaboration with the APRM, for having conducted this very informative study. That said, I also would like to use this opportunity to point out that I take an optimistic view when I look at the governance situation in Africa. Don't misunderstand me, there are challenges, but overall, and I'll explain to you why. My perspective is historical. When, for instance, one looks at the last 500 years of African history, they are extremely traumatic. I mean, colonialism, slave trade, you just name it. And the legacy of that is, we are still actually suffering from that legacy. Take the issue of, for instance, the fragmentation of Africa. The United States is one country with 5 time zones. One country. If you are working in your office in New York, in California or Hawaii or Alaska, they are still sleeping. One country. Africa, 54 countries. And definitely that impacts on the governance. Some of these countries are possibly not viable. Now also, I take the view that some of the positive issues that have emerged in Africa are issues to do with decolonization, initially, say, in the 60s, and also the eradication of apartheid, more recently, and white minority rule. That gave us the start to engage meaningfully with governance and to handle some of the challenges I've just mentioned. And in the last 10 years, some of the momentous events that have taken place, one being external, the other being internal, include the attack on Libya. Definitely that has impacted on the governance of Africa. The instability, the proliferation of small arms in the Sahel, where you find weak states, and indeed the resurgence of Boko Haram, amongst other things. But concurrently, the peaceful transition in Nigeria, a regional hegemon, democratic transition, I take the view that that has impacted extremely positively on that region. You couldn't have had, for instance, a peaceful election a peaceful transition in Gambia without a democratic Nigeria. Nigeria as a hegemon, and its being a democracy, or emerging democracy, or the democracy in transition, impacts heavily on that region because others, now ECOWAS, for sure in ECOWAS, you can't have a military coup with Nigeria being a democracy. Or a democratic South Africa also, another regional hegemon. Its being democratic has impacted greatly on this sub-region. As we may remember, The struggle against apartheid was a big cost on the frontline states. Some estimates put it to above $100 billion. So to understand, for instance, as to why Angola has issues, one cannot divorce it from the reality of the anti-apartheid struggle. There are thousands of Cuban troops there, the apartheid state was involved there, and so forth. But Angola now is being peaceful because of the ending of apartheid and South Africa again being a regional hegemon that's peaceful with its neighbors. Africa has other issues. As I'm concluding, she gave me 1 minute, so let me conclude. As I conclude, I think academia and also institutions like the Mo Ibrahim Foundation has also to look into challenges in Africa like, say, ethnicity. I think ethnicity is a very serious, in my view, challenge. Ethnicity has informed the Rwanda genocide, or the pogroms in the Eastern DRC, Burundi, and so forth. I think ethnicity should be equated to crimes against humanity, as for instance, anti-Semitism and racism. And if we put focus on trying to stop that, I think we will go a long way in solving Africa's governance issues.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you. Thank you for being such a positive African, trying to give rationale to some of the trends and so on, the causes for some of these trends. Thank you, and we'll listen to what our friends in the audience would say. Now I'll go to Dr. Hamdok. First, the ambassador has thanked APRM, MIF, South Africa. So I don't want any thank yous now. Just give us your comments, and then we're fine. Mr. Hamdok. Mr. Hamdok is a very good friend of mine, for whom I have great respect, both as a friend and as a strong intellectual. Mr. Hamdok.
Thank you very much, my dear friend and former boss, Abdullah Jani. I cannot afford not to say thank you and how delighted. No, for me, it's a special case coming back to this beautiful city of Pretoria. City I spent 5 years of my career here, over 10 years ago. So I'm very delighted to be back home. Thank you for the foundation for bringing me back. I like it here. But I fully agree and share the comments by the High Commissioner, the Ambassador, on the African positiveness. We need, as Africans, to see the glass as half full. This African pessimism, we have to really do away with it. But let me just look at, as an entry point, governance in the African context. If you look 40 years ago, we were all suspicious about governance. We thought this is externally driven agenda by Bretton Woods institutions, by the West, by all that. But Africans on their own rediscover governance. And we realize that unless you address your governance, you can get your macro right, you can get your sectoral policies right, but unless and until you address governance, nothing else moves, because it touches on everything. And I would like to think Africa responded positively to this agenda. Let me just flag 2 things. Africa gave the world the African Peer Review Mechanism, the APRM, which is probably the most unique instrument in the world, comparable to none but maybe the OECD DAC, but that one was on technical compliance. Countries are opening their offices, their place, the whole country, for a very rigorous review. It has a very high promise, and we are very delighted to see it led by our brother, Professor Maloka, under his able leadership. This is really taking us to heights. The second instrument is the African Charter on Governance, Election, and on democracy, governance, and elections. This is a unique instrument, comparable to only the Latin American Charter. But ours has sanctions, has all that. You know so well, today, if a coup took place in this continent, the following day, the African Union will suspend this country and enter into a process of returning to normalcy. Election is being held everywhere in the continent. 40 years ago, half of this continent was ruled by military dictatorships. Today, election is held everywhere, in every country in the continent. We know they are far from perfect, but they are moving in the right direction. Against this background, the Ibrahim Index on African Governance was established to also contribute to a credible assessment. It's the most comprehensive governance assessment in the continent today. And I think it's an index that is not driven by prescription. It does not here to criticize government. It is actually to point to those governments. It's a fairly disaggregated picture of everything you can think about. Don't just look at the composite index where you are ranked number 1 or number 54. Look at the fairly disaggregated picture, and you will, no doubt, find there some of the things that you are doing right, some of the things that you are doing wrong, and it is up to government to take that. I think serious government these days wait for the index to be launched to go and see the disaggregated picture on that. Before concluding, Chair, I just wanted to point to 2 areas, and maybe in the discussion we can maybe elaborate on that, where the index was spot on. The issue of sustainable economic opportunities. From the dawn of this century, we've been talking about Africa rising, the rising narrative and all that. Of course, the picture is far much complex than this. But the return of the growth to the continent is very much welcome. We know so well this growth did not produce the goods. It has very little impact on unemployment, very little impact on poverty. In places, it might have fueled inequality. This is spotted by the index. The trend of the last 10 years exactly showing that. You remember the presentation by our colleague Natalie, point to the fact that the most stagnant in the 4 categories is the sustainable economic opportunities, hovering around 0.01. This is an issue for the Africans to think about. And this is where the index value comes from. Okay. The idea of looking at what are the underlying factors, what is the nature of this growth, how can we get it better? And I think in the discussion, maybe we could elaborate on this. Okay. The other one, which I could not, and I will conclude here, Chair, could not help but admire the index on this, the falling in ranks for South Africa. This is a great economy, a great country, democratic and all that. But it slipped from 5th place to the 7th place. And I think this is definitely pointing to a number of underlying factors and issues for the South Africans policymakers need to address and look at what went wrong. And just as a footnote, this result stops at 2017. So it might not have captured, and it will definitely not capture the latest changes, which I could call them positive changes moving in the right direction over the course of this year. But I'm sure in the future, the data might reflect that. I'll stop here, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you for those useful comments. And I will refrain from commenting on comments so that really we move ahead. Now it gives me really pleasure to call on Prof. Tuli. Prof. Tuli, whom we all love in this continent, who has captured our hearts and minds, and whose bravery we salute. So, Prof. Tuli, let me listen to you, some of your initial reactions to the trends you've seen. And for you, I will let you speak. Speak your mind. I'm sure the audience will love that. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Excellency. I will also add thank you to the Mo Ibrahim Foundation in APRM. Just that one thank you. Firstly, I do agree with colleagues about the fact that today is better than yesterday on all fronts. And when it comes to governance in Africa, in regard to areas where we're not doing well, I think our greatest problem is deliberate planning for good governance and development. I do believe, sir, that our leaders spend a lot of time talking about colonialism and apartheid. Every time an African leader speaks, they're going to spend 90% of the conversation about how Africa was raped and devastated by colonialism, slavery, and apartheid. But the first 2 minutes of what you say is what we go away with. So when later you talk about where are we now and where do we need to go, you have lost us. If I meet young people within the AU, One Young World, and various ARC structures, their starting point is where are we? But they don't forget, of course, about what got us here. Their starting point is where are we and what are they doing to take us forward? When I look at these stats, for example, I am saying we're doing well, but we're not harnessing the youth dividend enough, which is what the Mo Ibrahim Foundation said and what Mo Ibrahim said himself at One Young World. We're not harnessing the youth dividend in many ways. One is education, deliberate educating young people for now, for 21st century African and global challenges. We're in the middle of the 4th industrial revolution. We're in the middle of, at the door of the 5th industrial revolution, but we're not aligning our education with those needs. Young people are pushing on their own. I mean, you'll see Kenya, young people are moving with their arms, with their robotics. You'll see AIMS, which was born here in South Africa and is now headquartered in Rwanda, moving with robotics. AIMS is African Institute for Mathematical Sciences, Africa Tinkit. You see a whole lot of initiative by young people. What we need to do is to pull that and bring it into the mainstream, scale it, and support it. The other way we're not harnessing the youth dividend enough, dear colleagues, and is planning. Yesterday we had Lindiwe Mazibuko show us pictures of all of these events where Africa's future is being planned. Africa's future is being, it's always mostly men in suits. Yes, it's mostly old men in suits. And then maybe there will be a splinter of me and Miss Magogo here and there. But look at this room. Look at the wealth in this room. The majority of people in this room are young people. And they're here because they care, because they already are doing things to push the continent forward. The question is, how do we involve them in the mainstream decision-making? Because they're involving themselves in their own corners in terms of what they are doing to take this continent forward. But I would like them to be at the center, not some youth forum, but look at Ethiopia. They've plunged, they've taken young people right into the mainstream. And it's not just the youth dividends there, it's also the women dividend that we're not harnessing. We are involving women, but we're not involving them as a critical mass in everything. Again, Ethiopia took the plunge. They even appointed a chief justice who's a woman yesterday. I mean, Rwanda has also been leading. This country has also made some progress in women as judges, women as, but where I'm concerned is planning the economy, planning economic growth. We need young people at the center. We need women at the center. The third group that I think we're not bringing at the center of planning, governance, economic growth, and socio-economic inclusion are startup businesses. If you look at all, big business, major decision-making forums, who speaks? It's big business. But who's going to lead the growth of this continent? Who are creating jobs? It's startup businesses, and with women flooding those numbers. Women and young people are the ones who are flooding the numbers when it comes to startup businesses. So we need to bring those. How will that help? It will influence education, because the Mo Ibrahim Foundation is saying that our education is doing well, but it's not aligned with the challenges of our time. And what are the key challenges of our time is meeting the socio-economic demands of the continent and helping the continent to find its place in the world. But having said all of this, one thing the Mo Ibrahim Foundation is doing well, which is something we're trying to do at Stellenbosch University with a Marshall Plan on social justice, is you teaching us to plan with data, because that's one of our weakest links, is that we, in many cases, we do statistics. This country, for example, my country, has great data, but we don't always use that data in our planning process. And then what do we do then? We go for policies that are based on one size fits all. And of course, the Gogo Dlaminis on the margins, they're left behind. For example, when we decide to digitalize services, we assume everyone is going to be able to access these digitalized services. We don't have compensation strategies to say, what about those who were born before technology? What about those who are poor, who don't have data, who don't have instruments, who don't know how to use instruments? So the idea is, let's plan with data as you are doing yourself with this data. But for me, my interest in planning with data is socioeconomic inclusion. Because part of the dividend that we are not exploiting or harnessing is everyone. We shouldn't leave people behind, whether it's based on ethnicity or regions or who they vote for. They are important in making sure that this continent is running on all fours when it comes to moving itself forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Professor, we listen to you. We listen to the need for Africa to plan for governance. Plan for governance based on particularly what the youth are doing. They're showing the way in a very, first we educate them, but also show them, pick up some of the initiatives from that they are doing in corporate business. So that's something we will hear from the youth themselves. But I believe that, the youth should be involved. Nobody would give them space. They have to take the space, and I hope we listen to them and how they would get into planning. And we had a youth forum, and we said the next generation, and they say we are the now generation. And if a now generation, be involved in all these activities, political activities, and be part of the decision-making system and machinery. I had promised that I won't comment. So I break my own rules, but that's my prerogative as chair. Now we go to one of the now generation. Yeah? She was a fellow and has a great initiative that's put on the table. Maybe it's a combination of all those initiatives that will buck some of the trends that we see. But Molango, you have the floor.
Well, thank you for calling me young. I've passed that threshold, but I feel young, so that's okay. And I agree with everyone else in terms of the optimism. I think it's good to be optimistic. The glass should be half full because you make your decisions from a different perspective than when you think in terms of being positive. And definitely data. I mean, that's the important thing about the index, is the provision of data. To inform policymakers. And I think it's worth reiterating the governance issues that the index covers. It's not just political. So often when you think of governance, you think of political issues, but it's economic and social. And these are public goods that governments should be giving to their citizens. And citizens have a right to hold states accountable to provide those goods. So all three areas are important for good governance. I think that's also very important to remember. And in terms of my overall impression of the results of this year's index, and especially the 10-year history, Hans Rosling, who recently passed away, but he produced a book called Factfulness. And he said it's very important to use facts because it allows us to understand and be right about the state of the world. And I think the index shows that some things are bad, but as Rosling says, they're getting better. I think that's always important to remember. You can have a situation where things are really bad, whether it's the situation of the law situation, maybe certain health indicators, but it's getting better, and that's always good to remember. And that does come through in the index. Overall governance is improving. But some of the things that sort of hit me in terms of these results do relate to sustainable economic opportunities and the need to, the fact that it's pretty much over the last 10 years been stagnant. So there's been growth, but we're not creating the opportunities. So people are being left behind or not being included at all from the outset. And that's a massive problem because everyone, from a policy perspective, talks again about this youth dividend. But it'll only be there for a short period of time. Eventually, Africa's population will stabilize. And if you have a whole series of generations of people who were not able to take part in that economic opportunity, then that creates a significant problem from a governance perspective. And the index has a lot of quantitative indicators, but there are also some qualitative ones related to satisfaction. And two of them, the two main areas where these indicators exist are around human development and sustainable economic opportunity. And what's interesting in terms of satisfaction, all of these indicators have actually gone down. And this is in terms of employment creation. We've spoken about this already. We're not creating jobs. So we're growing in many countries, but not getting jobs. People are unsatisfied about that. People are unsatisfied about the provision of water and sanitation, a basic right and needed for human dignity. People are unsatisfied with that. Our governments are not producing that. Another key area people are unsatisfied with is whether or not there's a narrowing in income gaps, and people are not satisfied with that either. And the last two areas, education provision, that's already been spoken about. People are not happy with that. And again, that goes back to being able to exploit the economic opportunities that exist. And the last area are basic health services. Again, significant dissatisfaction with the provision of basic health services. And us as African citizens, this is something that our governments should be able to provide. And particularly with education, the question I have, and maybe there are some answers in the audience, is education to me is a low-hanging fruit. It should not even be something that is debatable. We have the tertiary institutions to produce teachers. There are brilliant research institutions on the continent. Why are we not getting this right? Why is our states not able to provide something as basic as education? And I understand from the foundation that produces the index that this year there wasn't, or over this period that the index was put together, they had to drop off a measure of literacy because not all countries were producing. There was not the robust data around literacy. So how can government policy address education if you don't even have literacy statistics? So again, those are some of the negative things. Some of the two positive things are, for me, gender is improving across the board. I think that's something that Africans, we can be proud of. And also the health indicators are also generally improving. So those are the sort of two big positive things which jumped out at me.
Thank you very much. Madam Moderator, if you allow me, I will just take 2 minutes to really see how we can fire up our audience here, because they've listened to this comments from our panelists, which on the whole is positive, and they're saying these trends are there. Reasons are historical. Our country is fragmented. There are certain key events that have impacted on our continent. Our big countries are putting order in their house. If they do, then we will be able to deal with some of these trends. We have, the African continent has espoused governance, some of the instruments they have put in place, APRM and so on, etc. And of course, they raise concern on performance and economy. This, I really want to hear from you whether you feel that this is just providing alibi for some of the things that we are not doing, and we want to listen to you. And of course, the slightly dissenting voice is saying, yeah, these things are happening because you are not planning for governance. And then we want to hear from you whether, in fact, our government's context of this, planning for governance. Are you giving the right space to our young people too? And many of you here are young, and we want to hear from you how you would take this space yourself and not let others give it to you. Let me stop here. I'm not a panelist, I'm just facilitator. And Madam Chair, I will leave it to you now. Madam Moderator.
We do have people in the auditorium, people here who are walking around with microphones. There are plenty, and so they will come to you. And then let me just remind you that we are live broadcasting, so you've got to be very careful close to those cameras. So the traffic up and down is blocking the view. So we are live broadcasting. Just keep that in mind. We will start here.
Thank you so much, Mr. Moderator, right here on this side.
Let them announce their names, madam, if you can do that.
This is the Ambassador Dr. Shifaro from Ethiopian Embassy. I really would like to thank the organizers in this very forum. Having said this, the governance agenda, as already highlighted, is one of the bottom line agenda for all of us. One thing which I would like to bring to the panelists as well as to the previous presenter particularly is the doing and the action aspect of the governance as a whole. As my sister rightly mentioned, in Ethiopian Showcase, you raised how we were praising the women participation for a long, many years.
Madam Ambassador, I'm not cutting you off, but we give you 2 minutes.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
So having on that, doing the governance in action, how that is assessed is an issue. That's number one. The other thing is how we will factor the regional blocks, the regional economic communities to act and to really share their own experiences when moving forward, so that collectively we rescue the continent towards the continental integration, including the governance. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Masa.
The next question as brief and succinct as you possibly can, so that we can get time to answer the questions and accommodate more people.
Thank you so much. My name is Gugu Nonjinge. I'm from the Afrobarometer. My quick question basically is on gender. I'm translating research into actual normative frameworks and policy changes on the ground, because as much as the data is showing that the gender index has improved across the continent, it's not necessarily what we see in the continent, i.e. achieving gender parity in our countries. That's not necessarily the case, yet the data is saying that we are improving. Again, on youth, young people have been labeled as a ticking time bomb in Africa. What I want to ask Prof. Thuli, though, is that how do you make sure that regeneration of young leaders in our political system is achieved?
Take a third question and then the answer.
Sophie Mkwena from the SABC. My question is directed to Prof. Thuli and High Commissioner of Uganda. The report itself looks like it's focusing on young people, a continent with a growing population composed mainly of young people. How do you reconcile that with the old leadership that we have on the continent? Take, for an example, Uganda. Are we going to be able to plan for the future when we don't give young people leadership positions so that they can plan their own future? And the last question, conflict on the continent. Yes, pockets, but they are a deterrent in terms of investment and planning. What are we doing? Are we giving young people to come up with solutions in terms of ensuring that finally our continent is at peace? We don't have a situation such as the CAR, the Burundis, particularly the Great Lakes region, the DRC.
Thank you. Do you want me to take over now? And yes. Yes, because really, basically, this is all around the youth challenge. We thank the ambassador from Ethiopia, where great things are happening in that country, which we salute. Really, basically, it's a question of space for the young. How do we get rid of some of our old leadership, as Mr. Mo Ibrahim says, they only lead you to your graves. So let's hear from there. Unfortunately, of course, we are not young people, so I don't know how we could answer that. But we will let the panel react. I would start with Prof. Thuli.
Well, thank you, Your Excellency. Let's start with the question of young people. To get women on the agenda and to get women in power, we specifically made a demand and we specifically put an ideal number. And at some stage, we were talking about 50-50 and even talking about the zebra. Is it not time that young people make that demand very squarely to the Commission and say that at least leadership in government, at least leadership in the business structures that make decisions about our present and our future, there should be a certain percentage of young people? And this is, we're not doing for young people as charity. We're doing it as His Excellency just said, is we want to make sure that we infuse our decision-making with the knowledge that young people have. We used to say the leaders of the future. The leaders of now, we used to say young people don't read. I've never seen people who read as much as today's young people. they don't walk around with books. They walk around with their cell phone, and they're reading from Twitter. They're reading from the internet, from various structures. So that's what has bridged the gap, because a whole lot of young people, including my own children, know a lot more about life than I knew at their age. But where I am careful, I'm not saying let's get rid of old leaders. But I'm thinking on the driver's seat, it would be a good thing if, for a change, we let young people lead, or at least younger people lead. But I'm not saying let only young people lead. In my culture, we say, indlela ibuzwa kwabaphambili. You ask for directions from those who have walked before. So we're asking for a mix. This continent, to serve its old people, must make sure that those who make decisions represent all people, all ages, all forms of diversity. That would be diversity in terms of gender, age, disability, sexual orientation, religion, etc. Just to make sure that when we think we walk in everyone's shoes and we create a continent that harnesses the best from all of us and ensure that it leaves no one behind in terms of meeting their needs and freeing their potential. That would be the one thing that I would say. On the question of the paradox of a continent that is young and the leaders, okay, I've answered that question. It is a paradox, my dear sister Safi, that we all acknowledge that we have a young continent, so leadership should be predominantly young then, as opposed to be old, just purely because it has to respond to their needs. But we all should be represented. To Google, how do we translate research into normative frameworks? I think you're not giving the gender movement or the women's rights movement enough credit. I would say that a lot of the things that were thoughts were translated into normative frameworks. For example, if I take South Africa, why did we end up with a constitution that adopts a substantive notion of equality? It started with gender conversations, gender jurisprudence, and gender legal theory. And we then moved that conversation into the spaces of drafting the Constitution, the Employment Equity Act, the Equality Act. But fortunately, that gender conversation was not just women chatting all by themselves. It was a conversation that brought women on board. And people say we should all be feminists. I say we should all be humanists. So that whenever I plan, I listen to people with disabilities as well, and I bring whatever their thoughts are into the mainstream. But I do think we are bringing some of it. Where I agree with you is that we are slow. The index, for example, is saying we're not attuned when it comes to education. Even on safety.
My organizers are frowning at me nowadays.
Just one last one. Yes. But even on safety and the rule of law, yes, we're not doing as well. And then partly because we're not mainstreaming issues such as gender into safety and the rule of law. And violence against women has become part of the backlashes of our time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No, I won't go. I want the ladies here to be proud of me. So I'll go to Malango first and say your comment, and then I will come to you. No, I will come to you. Don't worry. I know. Hold your firepower. Go ahead.
So I'll only respond to one. Is this on to one comment related to the gender issue? I agree. It's there's an improvement, but I think we're starting from a low base. So maybe give credit where it's due. There's an improvement, but it's nowhere near enough. As professors already mentioned, they're cross-cutting gender issues which are perhaps not reflected entirely in the index. I mean, the good thing is that if you have it on the radar screen at a political level, it can at least create the space for it to be filtered down, call it to the real level where things happen. And I think one of the key areas, though, in terms of, and this is a very sort of personal view, not necessarily dictated by what the index is saying, but women need to be economically empowered, and then you see a massive shift. And one of the worrying indicators that where women's economic empowerment is affected is on the robustness of banks. And that's been an indicator that's going down. When you say banks, I mentioned banks because they're important for financial inclusion, the financial system. And financial inclusion is critical in today's world for economic prosperity. So if the banking system is not robust, women will continue to be excluded from it and will continue to no longer be economically included, and that's a big risk. So the trend could change either way, I think, with this issue. But if it's addressed, as it is in some countries, then I think that could see a big shift over and above the rhetoric that you
Thank you.
about.
Thank you, Marango. I know that my colleague on my right wants to fire out on the question and so on.
Just to interrupt.
But I will let Dr. Hamdok come in, and then I'll let you have your say. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. I would like to respond to 3 issues. The first one, which my sister there responded to, on the youth aspect. I think if you look at the first generation of leadership in this continent, those who led us to independence, all of them, they were either in late 20s or 30s. Ambassador in your home country, the former late excellent Prime Minister was 34 when he became Prime Minister. Current Prime Minister is not that old. So I think the idea of leaders should be young, it resonates very well with the history and with the current. And I'm very glad that you are talking about this as young people. Don't let the old generation tell you that you are the future. I think I will emphasize you are the current. And you should take that yourself. Nobody will give it to you. It cannot come from somewhere from outside your movement. Take it by the horn.
Preaching revolution.
And work on it. This is the role of the young people. I remember, I will have to tell you this anecdote. I saw an interview with Lord David Owen. If you remember, I'm sure most of you will not remember that. The youngest foreign minister of UK. He was interviewed recently about young people and politics. He said politics should be performed by young people. He said, as a young foreign minister, I had the guts to take decisions, clearly. He said, now I am old and gray. I look at things, left, right. I stay in the gray area. These old people are good, wisdom, history, experience, but they can be advisors. Sitting in the saddle and leading countries, it needs young people who have the guts to take decisions. I leave it there. On the ambassador, I think you're absolutely right. The index is precisely doing that. It's not about pronouncements, intentions, and all this. The Ibrahim Index is about holding government accountable on their actions. It's about outcomes. It's not about intentions. And I think that is why it is factual. Mm-hmm. And this is what the beauty of it is, talking about outcomes, not... I leave the question on the conflict, maybe other colleagues at the ambassador might look at it. It's particularly
Mr. Ambassador,
great region.
I know that you want to react particularly to the comment on your leadership in your country, but feel free.
Well, I would like to thank the wonderful interaction we are having, the audience, for the wonderful interaction we have, the feedback. The Africa we live in today is an Africa that, well, through struggle, is an Africa that aspires for democracy and democratic institutions. So anybody what we need to work for is to have the enabling environment for democracy and to access leadership through democracy. And once you become a leader, to be a democrat. We are not, say, aspiring for youth dictatorship in the future or whatever, or the elimination of the old. But similarly, we should have responsive systems. In our lifetime, we have seen very old people being supported by the youth. Take Mahathir Mohamad in Malaysia. He's 93. This is an old man who stood without a political party. For sure, it's not only people in their 90s who voted for Mahathir Mohamad. He's the current Prime Minister of Malaysia. Nelson Mandela wasn't 17 when he became what he was, the first transformative leader of this country. Or in the United States, I was in the United States then, and Bernie Sanders. There were many youthful people who stood, but Bernie Sanders was a man with a completely gray, but on the left of the United States Democratic Party. He really enthused the youths on university campuses because of his youthful agenda. So we should not confuse youth with youthful agenda. The Hitler youth were young, but clearly the Hitler youth, I mean, the Nazis had a very strong youth movement, the Hitler youth, but the Hitler youth were not necessarily with a transformative agenda. So what I think is important is to have a youthful agenda or a responsive agenda or an accommodative agenda. Coming to Uganda, comparatively, there are few countries I know that have youthful agendas like Uganda. For example, in parliament, talking about leadership, there are slots reserved or what they call ring-fenced for the youth. But not only in parliament, even in local government, to the extent that to be on that slot, you must be a youth. They are ring-fenced. Our cabinet, if you take the time to study, to be informed, our cabinet has many youthful people. I know of people in cabinet whose first jobs was to be a minister. I'm not saying it's paradise. There are challenges for sure. But comparatively, my sister, we are more youthful and with a better youthful agenda than many I know. And also, we are striving for the ideal. I thank you very much.
Ambassador, thank you. I don't want to use this as a platform to go into national issues here and so on, but thank you for that explanation. Jay, you are very quiet, and I'm worried when you are quiet, because you are not a young guy, so you don't want to come. Next time you will come. Okay. I think, I have no
another round.
Yeah, sure, go ahead, yes.
Another round of questions. Yeah. The microphone will be there. Just
hold on, let me ask Rebecca, how many more minutes do we have? One more round. Okay, but you said a round, you didn't tell me the time. How much time? Pardon? 3 more, but how much more time do you have? 10 minutes, 15, 20?
30 minutes.
10? No, 10 is so. All right, that's all. All right, let's go ahead.
All right, good day to everyone. So my name is Boniswa, and I am from the University of Pretoria, and I'm studying education. And so my questions, it's like 2 questions. I'm just drawing from like the speakers since the start of the event, and also just general conversations like on WhatsApp and groups and so forth. So what interested me was just a mention of how things like free trade zones, trade agreements.
Don't give us a speech, huh?
And so forth are they're good for investment for the country, which makes sense. Also because from what we learn in school as well is that how South Africa performs or it's functioning, well, it's being influenced by like neoliberal like policies and frameworks and so forth. So I'm just trying to understand when the index does, when you do your analysis for the index, and holding the government accountable, like how we separate the blame in inverted commas, the blame towards government versus like corporate. So what I'm trying to understand, for example, is we might have, for example, a politician who's got like trading rights with like McDonald's, for example, and then I will see that McDonald's will be set up in 6 months because it's a corporate or private entity.
Okay,
and yet a road construction will take about like 9 years.
We hear your question. Okay, thank you. Thank you, thank you.
Thokozan, Kamalamu Malusi Mngube from University of Johannesburg. Thank you very much, and thank you to the panel and those who organized. My question straight to the point. I'd like to thank the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, but more pertinently, what I did not see in the indicators there, maybe I missed it, then you can point me. I think it's a very important variable to have in the indicators. For instance, to have, you said the youth dividend is 60% below the age of 25. From 25 up to about the age of 35. In South Africa, we have many of them who have master's degrees. Can we have them being indicated as a variable in your indicators there? Can we have them from the Mobrain, because you are now very influential, can we have them access probably funding through other means, for instance, African Development Bank, and indicate cooperatives instead of monies going to individual BEEC personalities, they must go to cooperatives. And Mr. Mo Ibrahim, because of the influence he has, these are used because it's not just a formal job, but it's also job creation. Can we have that type of an indicator? The other indicator I did not see as a variable. Point me if I've missed it because I've tried to look for it. We seem to be having a bottleneck in movement of people because we can have good policies, but if there's no movement, real robust movement, ease of movement of Africans across the continent, okay, they can push the frontiers of the police to bring about better security. So if those two variables, if they're there, if you can point them up to me, if they're not there, can you think about it and make sure those variables are there? Thank you very much.
Thank you for a very positive. Madam Moderator, are we still continuing? One more? Where I don't see you.
Yeah.
Go ahead, yes.
I'm here. I'm Gertrude, Mo Ibrahim Scholar, 2013-2014. I have a very, just one question. I think we've reiterated on it many times. And you spoke about it as well. What are we doing wrong with education? I mean, I feel we need to address it at the point of activism. So maybe you could touch on that.
Very, very good question. Issue of quality and relevance of our educational system.
Yeah.
One more question,
yes,
and
I
that's
have
it.
Just a very quick question.
My moderator, where is she?
Very quick question to the panelists, but particularly directed. My name is Jagan Gray Johnson. I'm with the Open Society Foundation, and this is directed really to the Mo Ibrahim Foundation. This is an excellent report. It's a longitudinal study spanning almost a decade. And the question I want to ask is, what are the plans in taking it forward to ensure that the policy makers at the state level actually take heed to some of the early warning systems that are in it? And also, how can you encourage us, or what words do you have for us, especially some of us working in civil society, working around the policy analysis work that we do? What can we do to also help you in trying to push these things forward at the state level? Thank you.
Thank you, Jagan. Thank you very much. Now, I still don't see my moderator, but I will let the panel react to this and very shortly, very succinctly, so that really we leave. Rebecca is insisting that we go on. Mr. Ambassador, I start with you this time.
I thank you very much. Well, to start with...
and 2 minutes you have.
It's important to accommodate. It's important to be responsive, but we should not romanticize. There are many youthful African leaders who have been a disaster. Jammeh was one. Sergeant Doe was another. I could name quite a litany of them. But it's important to have democratic structures, responsive, and accountability within that context. And also then to provide capacity to the youth. And that comes to, having political parties that provide leadership skills to the youth, but also having the right education. Having the right education, I mean education that is tailor-made to the needs of given societies. That's also important, having healthy debates. I think this country is well suited. You have got many think tanks, you have got many institutions, but for sure you need to, and I think a responsive government.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Abdallah?
Thank you, Moderator. I'll respond to 2 or 3 questions. First, on the quality of education. I think this is, again, another area. The index was spot on picking the problems with the quality of the education. I think there is no debate on the centrality of education for the development process. If you look at the Southeast Asia experience, these are very poor countries, South Korea, Singapore, and others. But their miracle was through the education, development of human factor. So I think we have no shortcuts. We have to, as Africans, put a lot of emphasis on the education, and the index is speaking that rightly. More important, actually, in the education aspect is the issue of getting the right balance. Today, Africa produce, if you look at the balance between social sciences and hardcore sciences, 70% of our graduates are in social science. 30% in engineering, hardcore sciences, and all that. This is balance. We need to change that. Many countries, I think Ethiopia, has a very excellent experience on this aspect. So we need to change that. Another aspect on the education is education has to respond to the labor market. It has to address the shortages of labor market. We are producing so many graduates, yet our economies are starved of skills which are not there. So I think this is an area we need to address. Okay. On the free movement of people, I think the question raised there is in the index quite a number of indicators which point to that. So look at them.
You are addressing it to the right person. He is chairman of our advisory group that looks at indicators and the index generally.
Thank you.
Malango, you've had your say, or you want to comment still?
My only say is on education, it's a tough one, I think, because I assume it is, which is why it hasn't been done. I do think on one side there needs to be more participatory civil rights support to highlight these issues. We need to understand what the challenges are in each particular country. It's very different. So at primary school level, yes, there's more enrollment, etc., but there's often a big dropout of particularly girls at secondary school, and it's different for different reasons in different countries. So we need to understand some of those dynamics, and then I think build a really strong civil society to demand that right for education. So that's my only comment around that.
Okay, thank you. Prof. Tuli, you have the last word.
Thank you, sir. On education, I would say we need to link all of these indicators that the foundation has given to us. For example, we're not doing very well on safety and the rule of law. And that has implications for education, because if people have to become refugees and leave their hometowns, their education is disrupted, their economic sustainability is disrupted. So I would say going forward, for us countries, taking the data that we have received from the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, I would advise that we all countries take this feedback and assess at a country level now, how do we align our planning with the results we want? The results we want in terms of our own national development plans, our regional development plans, our continental development plan, which is Agenda 2063, and our sustainable development goals. But I would say we need to improve on safety and the rule of law and human rights. I also think that we've spoken a lot about participation in human rights. But I agree with the ambassador that people who lead should lead because they're the best we have. They should be the most trustworthy, the most competent, and the least selfless. The least selfish. At the Tuma Foundation, we actually say for you to lead in any structure, from cradle to grave, you should be an epic leader. That is a leader who's ethical, a leader who is purpose-driven, who aligns your decisions with the world you want to live in, a leader who's impact-conscious, somebody who knows that every decision you make or don't make has consequences on creating the world we want to live in. And lastly, a leader who's not committed to power, but a leader who's committed to serve. And I do agree with you in that regard. But also at the Tuma Foundation and also at Stellenbosch University where we are, I think that on sustainable livelihoods or on sustainable economic opportunities, we need to make progress because that has implications for peace in this continent. As long as our people are hungry and angry, none of everything else that we do is going to succeed sustainably. And how, thank you. And how are we going to handle that? Let's invest in small business. Let's invest in startups. Let's rather, instead of asking small business to buy shares in big business, let's have big business buy shares in small business and bring capital into small business. And also let's use the Africa Free Trade Area as an opportunity for collaboration, sharing data, and sharing experiences. And lastly, just the last one, let's free our continent from being a consumer continent. Yes, we are in the middle of the 4th industrial revolution. Each one of us is carrying a laptop. Each one of us is carrying a cell phone. It's improper that this big continent is carrying laptops and cell phones and tablets from other continents. because that takes away our foreign reserves. But also, we must create employment that creates employment. Do you understand? Because they talk here about sustainable economic opportunities. The kinds of jobs you create by being an input-oriented continent are not sustainable jobs. So that's just my way forward is
Thank you.
Let's liberate ourselves from being a consumer continent.
Thank you. There's one question that I want to respond to, and that came from Open Society in terms of how do we carry this forward. We continue to engage the countries in different forms. One is, seminars like this, workshops like this, discussion groups like this, so that really we have reaction from all stakeholders as to the findings and what's to be done. The other is we also go into the individual countries. We do that. We engage heads of state, we engage civil society activists, so that really we bring more consciousness to this report and the index and just see how best they would. But we are not, it is not our role to say this is what government should do. What we have done is we're taking a picture, right? We are the photographer. We don't want you to say because you look ugly is due to us and so on. No, we do that and we say this is how you look. And to be able to fix it, it is you who should fix it. Whether you're going to powder your face better and so on, you do that. But we do that and we bring the results of the photography to your doorsteps and we say, let's have a national debate and dialogue on it. Use it also to drive your policy. Look at it as a dashboard. Natalie Delapalme was telling me that today. Look at it as a dashboard and saying, these are our policies. This is where our policies are taking on. Where do we need corrective action and so on? This is what we are trying to do, and it is our collective responsibility. This is not the foundation. It is a collective responsibility of all of us, based on the results, to see how we make sure that we take action based on the findings of it. Let me stop here. I don't want to do because then Rebecca might never let me speak again. I think we'll stop here. I think it's been a fantastic exchange. The great panelists, but really reaction also from the crowd. So can you join me in thanking our panelists for a great time? Thank you. Thank you.